I was in college, and I just bought like kind of the entire worldview. Oh, we have identity politics. Oh, maybe white people need their own identity politics. Maybe we need to, we have feminism that's anti-male. Oh, maybe we need misogyny. Maybe we need to, maybe giving women the right to vote and all these other, right-wing ideas. Maybe that's the way to go. And it was like that's I think that's a lot of people do get there through kind of this kind of negative polarization. They just don't like somebody, and then they go to the other end of the spectrum and they say, okay, this is kind of my home now.
Given the nature of Tangle, I'm drawn to people whose political views are organically evolving. That's especially true when those people are public figures whose writing and reading is especially influential. Meet Richard Hanania. Over the last few years, Richard has become a well-known conservative voice. Vice President J.D. Vance has called him a friend. Elon Musk has elevated his tweets and his posts. He was even a contributor to Project 2025's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion section. But his story has also been rife with controversy. In 2023, a HuffPost reporter discovered that he had been writing under a pseudonym for a number of alt-right and white supremacist websites between 2008 and the early 2010s. His writing promoted a variety of extremist views. I'm just going to read a few here. He identified himself as a race realist. He said that he supported eugenics and the forced sterilization of low IQ people, which in his estimation were most often Black. He opposed race mixing and argued that Black people cannot govern themselves. He even suggested that if he ever owned Twitter, he would prevent feminists, trans activists, and socialists from posting on the platform because they are wrong about everything and bad for society. His public image predictably and rightfully cratered after news of his pseudonym broke. But then something interesting happened. He owned it, all of it. Instead of denying that he once held those views or framing himself as a victim or attacking the journalist who wrote the story about him, he started writing about how all of this happened, how he went down the alt-right rabbit hole and how he came out the other side. He wrote about his experience, how his views have changed, and he had an entire decade of public writing to point to vouch for a genuine evolution. And he kind of remade his entire image as the guy who was once a white nationalist but came to a more rational, moderate, conservative politics. And in the last couple of years, his writing has once again become very influential. And he's, in fact, even become a conservative critic, someone who writes some of the most biting criticisms of conservative politicians and thought leaders. So I reached out to Richard for an interview based on this story, the story of him going down the alt-right white supremacist rabbit hole and coming out the other end. And I was interested to hear about how that happened. And in the time between scheduling our interview and actually doing the interview, something else interesting happened. Richard came forward and said that he regretted his vote for Donald Trump. He was somebody who kind of begrudgingly voted for Trump, but still believed that Trumpism was better than whatever the left was offering. And apparently that view changed. So in our interview, we also talked about that, his decision to announce on X that he regretted his vote for Trump, why he came to that decision, and all the stuff that contributed to it. I spoke to him for about an hour. You're about to see a pretty much unedited, full picture of that interview. There's a transcript up on our website at readtangle.com that has been edited for length and clarity. And there's a podcast version of this interview as well, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. So I hope you guys enjoy. Without further ado, Richard Hanania. Richard Hanania, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Isaac.
So I think maybe just to start, to table set a little bit, I'd love if you could tell our audience a little bit about your personal story. I mean, I think you had maybe one of the more public political evolutions that a lot of political writers I follow at least have had. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened to you and how you sort of landed here, sitting here talking to me?
Yeah, so I was an anonymous writer around 2009, 2010. I was part of the original alt-right 1.0. Nobody knew this at the time. It was under a pseudonym. I stopped. I went off and I became an academic. I got a law degree. I got a research fellowship at Columbia. Then I was at University of Texas, and I started writing for the public now 10 years later or so. At that point, 2009. 2018, 2019, under my own name. Appeared in, New York Times and Washington Post, a lot of kind of mainstream op-eds, had my own Substack. I was always a right-leaning person. My views had evolved a lot since then. About the same time, the alt-right was kind of taking over the conservative movement. Trump was their guy. Immigration became an issue they were obsessed with. There kind of became an willingness to tolerate or even embrace kind of open racist or misogynistic ideas that people used to kind of hide behind anonymity to talk about, but now had become a kind of main thing. There's also kind of a conspiratorial angle that's outlook that's taken over the right, which I was never into, but this is kind of part of the general story. And then I become a writer. I mean, I wrote a book on wokeness and its relationship to civil rights law that came out in 2023. I was, mostly considered on the right, although I had an independent streak. Like I think that a lot of the things I wasn't afraid to say, for example, that January 6th was a coup attempt. 2020 was not stolen by the Democrats. The COVID vaccines were a great thing. So I would say these things. I believe these things, but at the same time, I was very, very conservative, and I believed in free markets. I believed wokeness was a major problem. I believed in being tough on crime and all that. And then my previous writing comes out in 2023. And it's kind of an interesting place, and people are saying, "Oh, well, we knew he was a bad guy the whole time." But I think if you looked at what I was writing before that story came out in the Huffington Post, it was August 2023. I had already broken with the right on a lot of things. I mean, it wasn't like I changed overnight because of that. By 2024, I have probably the most. I have an endorsement of Trump, but it's basically probably the most anti-Trump endorsement you can imagine. It's basically the liberals are completely right about this guy. He's corrupt. He lies all the time. The movement behind him there's a lot of rottenness there. But I'm still a conservative, and we're going to get conservative policies, and that's what we got in the first administration. It was kind of within the normal range of what you'd expect a Republican president to do, despite some amazing stories that came out. And so I was a reluctant Trump supporter in 2024. By the way, I was tweeting. A lot of people thought I was going in the Kamala direction, and I almost got there. I mean, I was kind of so fed up with kind of what the right had become. And then so that was November, October. We're like 4 or 5 months later now. Yeah, the worst case scenario, basically what I thought the Trump presidency would be, came about. Even worse than I would have expected. I think these tariff rates, nobody thought that this was possible. RFK, I said explicitly at some point, RFK won't be HHS secretary. He might get a commission or something, because that's not something that would have happened in the first administration. I was over-indexing on what had happened before. I hadn't, I think, paid enough attention to my own arguments that the Trump movement was becoming more and more of a cult of personality, and he was less and less restrained as time went on. And so something like RFK becoming the HHS secretary, or him just doing tariffs because he feels like it, it was foreseeable. I have to take blame. I understood this at the time. I just calculated the odds wrong. I'm here now.
I'm curious. I really want to hear about some of your evolving views on Trump, or how the administration has not sort of matched your expectations. Before we get there, though, I want to stay on the past just a little bit to hear. I'm interested, like, what it was like for you when some of that past writing came out, what the feelings were like for you, what your immediate reaction was. And then B, also, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, how you sort of stepped into the kind of more extreme online right, and then how you got out of it. Because I think, to me, that's a fascinating story that we don't hear very much, is somebody who sort of goes down that rabbit hole and actually comes out to the light on the other side, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was interesting. I was on a kind of vacation with my family. We were on our way to San Diego from Los Angeles, and I get a call from the Huffington Post reporter. He leaves a voice message, and then I check my Twitter DMs, and I always had a fear this would happen. I was kind of flying too close to the sun, because I was like getting more attention. The reason they wrote the article the way they justified it was I was getting a lot of attention from Silicon Valley types. So they were saying, like, Peter Thiel blurred my book. Elon Musk was engaging engaging with my tweets at the time. So this was I'd recently appeared on my podcast. So this is the way they justified that I was important enough to do this kind of big expose about. And so I always kind of knew that as I was getting more attention, more popularity, that something like this would happen. I had no idea kind of like I kind of had in my head what I would do in that situation. But you never know until it happens. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, there's no way he's coming back." I mean, the past writings were bad. I'm not gonna hide from that. And but I mean, I had built a reputation. I was lucky. I was lucky I had built a reputation at the time. So people could see, okay, I'd written a lot of stuff. Some things people liked, some people didn't like. But like, if that would have happened, like, at the beginning when I was just writing, I would have been really screwed. So I was kind of lucky that I had, 3-4 years to build up a kind of reputation, and it ended up working out, fine. I'm still, able to publish my book. Still, nothing. I'm not canceled in any sense. So I got lucky in that way. Maybe it's a reflection of the culture changing at the same time too. But yeah, to go back to kind of at the beginning and how I kind of fell into that stuff and how I got out of it. Yeah, I mean, I was seeing a lot of the stuff that became kind of the obsession of the right, the wokeness stuff. I mean, I was kind of an academic. I was into ideas. I was running into college and these like kind of proto wokeness, this idea that, that gender was like a social construct, that America was like a white supremacist country. And I just never bought any of that stuff. And like in 2009, 2010, it was kind of, people like the right didn't really obsess over that stuff. They were only talking about economic issues or defending Bush's war on terror. They were kind of in the later days of that. And I kind of went online and I found other people who agreed with me. And I kind of fell into like, these are the people who agree with me. This is what I'm reacting to. It's like I was in college and, I just bought like kind of the entire worldview. Oh, we have identity politics. Oh, maybe white people need their own identity politics. Maybe we need to, we have feminism that's anti-male. Oh, maybe we need misogyny. Maybe we need to, maybe giving women the right to vote and all these other, right-wing ideas. Maybe that's the way to go. And, it was like, that's, I think that's, a lot of people do get there through kind of this kind of negative polarization. They just don't like somebody, and then they go to the other end of the spectrum and they say, okay, this is kind of my home now. And the change was kind of more like, it was more of an intellectual development over time. It was probably, it was personal at the same time. I think I was just kind of young and unhappy. And I think that a lot of these people who fall into far right ideas are basically, they're looking for something in their lives. There's something missing. It's kind of too easy. It's too much of a trope to say that, but it is nonetheless true. I mean, a lot of the most kind of the people who are most extreme, who are anonymous accounts on Twitter, I've known them. I've been one of them. I know that these people are not happy and well adjusted and everything is going great. Usually, I mean, it's usually that trope about them having problems is usually correct. And so part of it is that, and then part of it is like a lot of these. I saw a lot of kind of contradictions in like these far right ideas. So, for example, one thing they would, these right wing people would say is like, oh, our cultural heritage is being threatened. Our institutions are being threatened by immigration. And the things that they would warn about is like, oh, look at Latin America. They have these third world dictatorships. They have these cult of personalities. They don't have concern for truth. And then I see MAGA pop up. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, you told me the third world was coming and our institutions were threatened. My God. And then the people who were like into restricting immigration because they were worried about Western culture were like the ones who had bought into like the nonsense about 2020 being stolen. And I'm like, okay, wait, maybe it's not like race or cultural background. Maybe these like bad ideas, that have had a role to play in making the developing world dysfunctional are like coming here, and it's like the ideas itself, and it's not the people, and it's not the deep cultural background. So it's partly personal, partly just kind of seeing this stuff. I mean, the wokeness thing, I mean, it was kind of vindicated because it became such a dominant force in our culture. But then it was like also like you didn't need craziness. You didn't need like white nationalism or something to push back on it. You could do that, kind of through legal democratic channels. And I think that process is working too. And so, yeah, I mean, it was kind of seeing these different things. I mean, over a very long time period, 15 years, it was kind of getting a new perspective on things and just like looking at how our politics developed.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, to me, it always whenever I observe political observations and political evolutions changing over a longer period of time, it often appears to me like people are experiencing some sort of intersection of personal changes tied to some kind of like intellectual development, being exposed to different ideas. Something that I see over and over again with public figures like you who change their positions in public is that it has this sort of dual effect of endearing you to some people and making you a pariah to others. I opened the door to some reader questions, asking people, hey, I'm going to interview this guy. Let me know if you have a question. One of the persistent ones that I got that I'm interested to hear you address is just how do you explain or sell to people the idea that you're undergoing some sort of genuine evolution versus some kind of career opportunism? I mean, like one of the people said, he used to mock people who supported Israel and now has sort of done a 180 on that. So like, is that something that is opportunism because his public status has changed? He's now mainstream, or is that just a genuine, real evolution that he can explain? I'm curious to hear you sort of address that criticism.
So I'll start with the Israel thing and then go more general. The Israel thing, I mean, I still mock people who are too pro-Israel. I mean, I am pro-Israel myself, but I do kind of, I think the Trump administration has been ridiculous with this campaign of kind of this broad spectrum. We're going to just prioritize fighting anti-Semitism and break all these kinds of norms in order to do that, like shipping people, kicking people out of the country because they wrote an op-ed that the government doesn't like. I mean, the fact that they're cutting off these the funding based on the idea that there's anti-Semitism in these universities, and maybe there's a little bit of that, but I mean, like, it's just kind of so disproportionate and so kind of crazy compared to what we actually saw with the protests over the last few years. So, maybe my tone has changed a little bit, but I think on the Israel, mocking people for being too supportive of Israel and being, I think that's something that stayed consistent. But as a more general matter, I think as far as like being a careerist or something like that, I've gone about it in a very strange way, if that was my goal, because when it came out in 2023, the whole point of the article, of, as I said, of why I was worth talking about, was because all these people on the right liked me. Like JD Vance referred to me as a friend, so that made its way into the article. JD Vance, the guy who would become vice president, a year and a half later. Elon Musk, followed me like a week or two after that story dropped, like as a show of solidarity, I guess. And so Musk was following me for a while. And so like my career kind of, my best interest at that point was to lean in. And people didn't want me to like apologize or say I was wrong. I don't think your audience might not realize how kind of radicalized a lot of these right-wing people are. They might not have liked like the stuff I wrote before, but they don't want to see anyone give an inch to the left or like apologize to them or anything like that. That kind of overcomes any horror they might feel over racism or sexism. So, it was kind of the smart move at that. And I was on Project 2025 too. I mean, it was still in good standing with the conservative movement after that. The best thing to do for me, I think, clearly would have been to lean into the tech right thing. That kind of reaction from your audience is common because, I said a lot of right-wing things or things that are out there, even the things that I'm ashamed of now. And I had a niche. I was kind of there. I was there on the right. I was in good standing with the tech right. I was in good standing with the MAGA. These two things were merging. I was just kind of horrified with what I saw. And so, yeah, people could, read me and they could see kind of how I've evolved and whether that's plausible to them. But I think the general story here is not what you would expect if you had the theory that I was just trying to be strategic. And another thing I do, and I don't blame people for not knowing all of this because people might not follow me that closely, but a lot of my Substack and a lot of my tweets are me in deep conversation with these figures that seem kind of obscure, and you're like, why are you talking about like these kind of obscure fringe right-wing figures? And I'm arguing with myself, right? That's the thing. So you could actually, if you're really, really interested, I mean, you could get into some of my articles. I mean, one of them is called "Diversity Really Is Our Strength." For people who want to Google it, there's another one called it's like something like "Why You Should Punch Right." If you Google my name, punch right. And this is a kind of philosophy that you should never attack like racists or people who are too far right wing. I have another one called Nietzschean Chuttery. So I'm constantly arguing with like what I was and kind of what I see in other people in ways that are like very kind of in the weeds. And probably these discussions are things that like most people are not going to be that interested in because it's not their story and it's not that important in the grand scheme of things. But I think people who are really curious as to like how I change, there's a lot of material there that you can dig into.
I'm interested. I mean, you're as a writer and a public figure, you're known for a lot of things. You just mentioned the Project 2025 stuff, which obviously became a huge story on the campaign trail in 2024. As this administration's first few months have sort of unfurled in front of us, there's been a lot of discussion about to what degree Project 2025 was or wasn't the plan for the Trump administration from the start and how closely they're actually working together. I'd love to hear your sort of first, I guess, explanation for our readers about what your role was in Project 2025, the parts that you contributed to. And then second, maybe hear you talk about, in the space of those parts that you contributed to, how you think things are going, which is, I understand it was kind of the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, what you're sort of seeing in terms of what the administration is doing right and what it's doing wrong.
Yeah. As far as kind of my role, I'm unsure if it's like, it was never explicitly told to me that like, don't talk about like exactly how the sausage is made, but I haven't heard other people talk about it. So, I'll honor that. I mean, my name is on there. But I'm happy to talk about kind of generally the ideas and, what I'm happy with and what I'm not happy with. So yeah, I mean, the DEI stuff, I mean, I written about this in my book. It was kind of, as we talked about before, the idea that you can take these concerns, which are legitimate about wokeness, DEI, affirmative action, and you can be productive, not just kind of have this oppositional culture, but you could say there are some things in the law that we've gotten wrong that's created incentives for businesses and universities to act in a certain way. And so that was, one of the themes of my book. And then we get the Trump administration in the first 2 days, executive orders basically did, I'd say 95% of what I recommended. There's still something on like the disparate impact standard, which they haven't explicitly gone after, but they've done the executive order on affirmative action and contracting, DEI and government. I was one of the first people to point out that a lot of this stuff, it doesn't require legislation. Even though it's a Civil Rights Act, a lot of it came through executive orders and interpretations of executive departments. And so Trump came into power willing to kind of yield his authority and push boundaries. And unsurprisingly, I think he did mostly good things on DEI. Now, I never, the power of the purse kind of thing where you, like the way we got a lot of affirmative action and the diversity stuff in universities in the first place was actually government funding. Government was kind of pressuring the universities back in the 70s to like adopt, quasi quotas for hiring in professors. And so you could do that kind of in reverse. You could kind of not only have court rulings against affirmative action, but you could have the government just put pressure because the Title VI, they say no discrimination based on race if they're practicing affirmative action or extreme DEI policies or whatever. You could do that. And there's been a little bit of that. It's kind of got in this weird direction. Again, like I said, it's all about like whether your universities allow too much criticism of Israel and they're using anti-Semitism and they're being very crude about it where they're hitting like the hard sciences instead of, trying to be a little bit more targeted in what exactly you're doing. And I think the Doge kind of thing follows the same pattern where it's just not carefully thought out. It's just kind of too destructive, and it's cutting a lot of things that we need, like basic scientific research. And I talk to people in colleges and universities who are, like in medical departments and the sciences, and a lot of them supported Trump, and they say this is what we bargained for. This is quite bad. And so yeah, I mean, I was happy with like the initial days of executive orders, the way this kind of civil rights, these bureaucratic tools have been used. I haven't been happy with since. I think it's been crude and counterproductive, like a lot of things the administration has done. But, again, I'll give them credit for like adopting a lot of the ideas that I thought were good. And then, of course, came tariffs and other things that the administration's doing I've been less happy with.
I'm curious. I mean, this is only occurring to me now, but one of the bigger kind of DEI stories of those first few weeks was the FAA story after the crash at Reagan Airport. Trump sort of pointed to DEI as being one of the causes of the crash. Then this big debate ensued about to what degree DEI was playing a role in hiring at an agency like the FAA. Could you talk a little bit about sort of what you were seeing, call some balls and strikes there on that debate that was, I mean, for a week was kind of dominating the news?
Yeah, I mean, my friend Jack Despain Zhao goes by Tracing Woodgrains. Did a lot of good reporting on this. I think he's generally right that the FAA, there was a lot of kind of putting their thumbs on the scale to get more diversity in hiring. One thing I objected to is, and that's legitimate to look at. One thing I objected to as this was going on was this idea. It's like the right has to be like so hysterical. Like the planes are going to fall. Like, I don't know if I could get on a plane with a black pilot. I don't know if we can, we're going to survive when the planes start crashing. Like, I don't know how things are. And like I just said, probably not. Like, if you look at like data on just like plane crashes, like we still have to be realistic. Like, it's probably not good that we have these aggressive kind of DEI policies in air traffic controllers. But and this is probably a more generalizable point. It's like people are so repulsed by kind of the morality of wokeness that they exaggerate its power, right? If your thing is like airline safety or making the airports more efficient or working better, it's probably not the number one thing you could do. Now, maybe sometimes it's like, diversity is really screwing things up and it's something we should think a lot about. But to go to that as like the explanation of where things are going wrong in every situation and kind of catastrophizing and saying things are we're going to have planes. Look, planes are going to fall out of the sky is a testable theory. And we didn't have that. And you looked at the data, we didn't have even an uptick in like acts. I think we might have had we might have had like there might have been like incidents. There might have been something, but like I mean nobody was dying. It wasn't anything like that. And so, yeah, I think this is kind of a cautionary tale of like, there's often very legitimate issues at the core here. It's just that the right is so kind of obsessed with identity. I mean, they're kind of the other side of the coin of the leftists who are obsessed with identity. They see it everywhere, and they see it as the most necessarily always the most important thing going on in any discussion. And that, if you're taking that perspective, it's kind of, it's kind of like you're not even dealing. You're maybe dealing with the problem, but you're like often overshooting and you're prioritizing the wrong things, and it kind of leads you in an undesirable direction.
I'm curious. You talked a little earlier about how you have often gotten into these sort of punching to the right a little bit. You've encouraged some of that. You're arguing with yourself in some of these pieces that you've written. One of the stories that you wrote that caught my eye, and I think just based on where I was seeing it shared, was probably one of the more read pieces that you've written in the last year or two, was about conservatives being more susceptible to conspiracy theories than people on the left today. It was a really interesting piece. I mean, I think it articulated something. As someone writing oftentimes from the middle, it's one of the things that I run into with my readership. There are so many things about the left that I detest in today's current makeup. But one of the things I struggle with the most with a lot of my more conservative readers is I often feel like they are falling into these honey traps on the internet. And, the big one is obviously that the election in 2020 was stolen, which is something I've done a ton of reporting on and have gone into with an open mind and tried to explain why it was nonsense. And you sort of just went through this litany of these stories from the last few years that conservatives have grasped onto and kind of compared them to the maybe not conspiracy theories, but sort of half-baked or backwards ideas that the left sort of grasps onto and becomes religious and zealots about. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk about the thesis of the piece, how you came to view things this way, and maybe support it a little bit like you did in the article for some of our listeners who haven't read it.
Sure. So, this, like a lot of things, this kind of starts in a lot of articles started conversations I have with people or what I was seeing going around on Twitter. And I think that one thing you see, especially since Musk bought Twitter, I mean, it's really the entire Trump era, but since Musk bought Twitter and these things have been allowed to proliferate, is that conspiracy theories really, really have taken over on the right. Yeah, the big one you mentioned, the big lie about 2020. But then, like, it's not even, it's like just the normal things that they concerned about. So this 2020 stuff, it did lead to all these concerns, like these laws passed, voter ID. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but like people were, canceling these like electoral commissioners and stuff at the state and local level. And then you have like Musk comes along and he's pushing stuff like the Democrats just want to, they just want to legalize all these illegal immigrants. This is why they're shipping them to like get them in the vote in the 2024 election. They claim Musk was basically amplifying some Alex Jones thing about the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, which the Republican-backed candidate just lost by 10. So it's just kind of a default when they lose elections now. They're going to claim that they're stolen. And and then when you point this out that the right is so overwhelmingly taken in by conspiracy theories, you'll get a response from from right wingers, and it'll be something like, "Well, the left has talked about Russian collusion," and they talk about, sometimes they'll say, "Well, systemic racism is kind of like a conspiracy theory, and kind of the patriarchy is kind of a conspiracy theory," and like, look. These things, they could be false. You could disagree with leftist ideas on race and gender. At the same time, acknowledge that this is something else from a conspiracy theory. A conspiracy theory is the idea that basically there's a conscious effort by a group of people to accomplish something secret, and you're basically uncovering this, right? And actually, leftist ideas about patriarchy are not that exactly. I mean, or systemic racism, they're often quite the opposite. They'll say that no individual being racist is responsible for disparities. They'll say there's been a system, and it's a theory that I don't agree with. I mean, I would argue against this stuff. But it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fundamentally different thing. And it's kind of bounded, like people just believe this thing that you could think is false. With the right, you have these false beliefs that are like not really even tied to ideology. They just are always there. It's just kind of a default. When and the big example that this just stuck with me, this is why I rely on it so much in the article, is when Nancy Pelosi's husband was attacked by a hammer, and then it's like Trump, Ted Cruz. The New York Times has a graphic that I copied and pasted. Like all these people, like, high-ranking senators, the presidential candidate, Tucker Carlson, one of the biggest media figures in the country. They're all either saying, they're implying that there's something off here, that he was visiting a gay prostitute is one of the things I heard. I mean, just these weird things based on literally nothing, like nothing. There's nothing you could point to. It's just an old man was attacked, and they started saying he was calling a gay prostitute. It's that simple. And I said, okay, look, you think the left is bad. Now try to imagine the equivalent. Ivanka Trump gets into a accident, and let's say, can you imagine that without any reason at all, Rachel Maddow and like Chuck Schumer start saying she was out buying crack and doing some other kind of, I don't know, going to meet somebody to cheat on her husband with or something like that, right? Like no, like Maddow, like whatever you think of her, whatever you think of Schumer, they're not doing this thing which Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump, and to a lesser extent Ted Cruz and Elon Musk and these other. I'm not cherry picking anonymous right-wing accounts that no one's ever heard of. I'm going to the top media figures, and I'm going to the top donor to the Republican Party, the owner of the largest social media site, their presidential candidate, right? I'm going to like the people who are most prominent on the right, and they're just crazy. They're just not connected to reality. And you see example and after example like this. And for people who like social science and empirical data, I think that this stuff you could prove this just by watching conservatives and liberals and like thinking about these cases. But yeah, I mean, there was a very good study where they looked at basically the most viral news stories in, I forget, some election cycle. And it's just, they coded them as true or false. Like they're not controversial, not things that are kind of on the bubble, but just things that were completely made up. And conservatives just absolutely dominated the fake news game. It's you could show this empirically. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a serious problem here with the right and just kind of fake news and conspiracy theories. Whatever you think of left, you could think that the left is still worse, the right is still worse. Maybe you think conspiracy theories aren't as bad as leftist ideas about the economy or racial identity issues or whatever. Like, fine, but I try to call it when I see it, and there is this dimension, this kind of conspiracy fake news bubble. It is just simply worse on one side than the other.
Well, I think what's interesting is that, like, you are that person. You are somebody who, I mean, I think clearly believes that the left is worse despite those things. Like, you talked about your vote for Trump. You've talked about, like,
well, I mean, it depends. At this point, I would say maybe like Trumpism is probably worse than the mainstream left at this point. But
okay, interesting. Yeah. Well, I want to talk more about that then. I mean, I guess what fascinates me is, it's clear, at least from reading your writing, that you seem to have a goal here. Like sometimes reading that piece, for instance, I almost felt like I'm watching a mom sort of like smack her teenage son up on the back of the head, like, wake up, this stuff is nonsense. And it feels to me like you're somebody who is invested in the conservative movement and conservative ideals and conservative policies winning the day. And then you're sort of watching the way these people you would be ideological allies with act in a way that feels really disappointing. I mean, I guess I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about, like, what you hope to achieve by publishing a piece like that. I mean, is the idea that conservative thinkers are going to consume that content and maybe this will get through to them and they'll change in some meaningful way? Or are you just kind of venting and getting it off your chest?
Yeah, I think a lot of writers, I think people are just engaging in kind of cathartic, a cathartic process. And I think there's part of that with me too. I think but at the same time, yeah, I do think that kind of trying to convince the right that they're mistaken about some things, I have focused a lot on that. I've kind of, more recently, I've been wondering, like, what's even the point? Because a lot of these people are following their incentives that make sense, right? I'm trying to tell people to be smarter and have, like, better policy views and be more ethical and see the world realistically. And that's, like, important stuff to me, but that might not necessarily be that important to other people. So the extent to which people just care about owning the libs. I mean, I think that a lot of my work is like saying there's something unhealthy about this own the libs mindset, this kind of reactive culture, this oppositional culture. I think changing people, like, emotionally about, like, how they interact with the world of ideas and how they kind of approach public affairs. That's probably, like, there's probably a greater return to that, because a lot of the other stuff about, like, looking the other way when your own side is behaving badly and like thinking crazy things about the opposition, it's kind of downstream from, like, this emotional state with which people approach politics. So I think, like, I think that is probably more kind of, I've been doing both, but I think that way is kind of a more constructive use of my time and energy. Because if people are just approaching the issue from, like, we're going to own the libs and some people are just, selfish and want to increase their follower count or whatever, like, what they're doing is working. I mean, it's like, okay, the economy is crashing, but, like, if you have Trump's ear and you have a lot of social media followers and you're somehow cashing in and selling your, scam coins, and you're owning the left and all you do is drink liberal tears, that you're accomplishing your goals. The country could be, the stock market could be in the toilet, the country could be wrecked, but whatever. I mean, you've accomplished your goals. And so, like, there's a kind of hopelessness as far as that. I feel like there's some people who are just too far gone. At the same time, I think there's, I do think that, like, you could still change people's kind of emotional state in the way they approach ideas. And then, at this point, I have a kind of left-wing and centrist audience too. And, hopefully I could build some credibility with them and show them, markets are a good thing. Like, it's great that liberals have discovered the virtues of free trade and are criticizing Trump. I want to tell them, like, you should be more consistently take that perspective and, like, listen to market indicators and so forth. So, yeah, I've got a wide audience now. So there's, kind of a lot of different things I'm doing.
Yeah, so that's a great transition to the last few minutes here, where I want to bring this conversation into the present day. So, this week you said, I think for the first time publicly, that you were regretting your vote for Trump. Just now, a moment ago, you sort of said, you interrupted me to say, I'm not sure, maybe Trumpism is worse than what liberals are bringing to the table. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about this transition. I mean, what's happening for you as we sit here right now, that you're sort of going through this another political evolution, this sort of feeling that maybe this was a mistake? Why do you think maybe Trumpism is worse than what the left brings to the table all of a sudden in this moment?
Yeah. So Trumpism, I mean, could mean different things. So there was a first administration Trumpism, which was like Trump goes around just saying stuff and acting crazy. But like basically, Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan have control of the legislative agenda, and he has a lot of mainstream people in the administration, and they're thwarting Trump. I mean, basically at a lot of different steps, right? So that's a kind of Trumpism. It's kind of a populist style plus a more established Republican method of governance, right? So that is fine. I mean, that's a lot of things I don't like about it, but preferable to the left, right? This second administration Trumpism, where it's just people have been kind of selected for loyalty over time. The people who might push back on him, the people who might have their own kind of agenda, or who have kind of any trusted institutions are just gone. And it's just kind of whatever Trump says goes, and people are just trying to, curry favor with the king. And he can now put, these ridiculously high tariffs and kind of appoint people based on, to law enforcement positions, like appointing Kash Patel rather than Chris Wray, which he did in his first administration. That's a different thing. And now we're talking about, it becomes, it's not just like a spectrum where we move from here to here. It's like a different kind of governance, a different kind of ideology. And so now we're moving towards a kind of right-wing populist, kind of dysfunctional, third worldist kind of regime. And so as bad as, the left is, I do think that the kind of tail end risks of what we're seeing now are much higher. Trump is not listening to other people. He's not listening to market indicators. I mean, it's really just, we're in a bad situation. And so, this was like a possibility I was aware of before the election. But it's like I said, it's become worse than I thought. I'd regretted the Trump vote before. I thought, there's no point in like making a splashy announcement each time. Okay, now I hate Trump and now I like Trump, right? It's like, okay, I just give my opinion, and I was criticizing Doge, and I was criticizing Elon Musk and his role and kind of a lot of these things. And like, whatever, people can infer whether I regretted my vote or not. It just, with the tariffs thing, like my criticism became so scathing, and it became so obvious things were going off the rails, and people were like just asking me like, is it okay? Do I still feel okay about voting for Trump? At that point, I just had to address it. Like, I can't be this scathing, and then people will say, well, you voted for Trump. I got to say, okay, it was a mistake. Like, I have to now, there's like, it has to be addressed, just because things, I still had hope that, things would kind of get on track, and maybe they will. Maybe somehow he just switches tomorrow and says zero tariffs, and we have these deals with everyone. Who knows? Like, it could work out still. I mean, this guy changes his mind so fast, and like it's so kind of arbitrary that things could work out. But even if they do like work out in the end, it's still just like, what we've seen here is that this is fundamentally dysfunctional. And even if the tariff thing like works out, like the fact that he's kind of this crazy man, and he has this cult of personality around him, and he has this entire movement that is like not plugged into reality and a base that will go along with anything he says, we might get through the tariffs thing. He could switch up what he's doing, and it could work out, but something else will happen. I mean, this is just a terrible, terrible state of affairs. And yeah, I mean, we're just a few months in. We still got 4 years of this. So, I'm dreading what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious how far that criticism goes, I guess. I think what I hear most consistently from a lot of my left-leaning readers, and even a lot of my centrist readers or never Trump Republican readers, is that Trump is really genuinely undermining democracy. Right-wingers, people like Curtis Yarvin, are kind of leading this march toward authoritarianism, the intellectual bearers of that movement. I'm curious if you subscribe to the idea that, Trump is a meaningful threat to the democratic system, or you're just sort of opposed to some of the chaos and the economic, threats that we're witnessing.
So yeah, no, I think it's worth taking seriously. The idea that you have one political party that is kind of just rejects elections on principle, if it loses. I think that a lot of it is just specific to Trump. Like, look, I mean, when people like Blake Masters, lose elections, they don't, go charge the Capitol or whatever. There are very Trumpian candidates who just lose elections and then go away. I mean, you have Kerry Lake, who spent, an unusually crazy person who spent years and years relegated past elections and then losing another election. But, it is kind of specific to Trump. He has such a genuine connection with such a large part of the country, and he's such a shameless and like kind of morally rotten figure. It's like that combination of the connection and his like personal flaws like are just very, very dangerous. So the question is like, is it just a Trump issue, and does it change after that? I think that there's something to that. It's just Trump, but like, do we go back? Like a Republican administration, the fact that Trump can just appoint his cronies to be the attorney general and another one to be the director of the FBI. Like, does any Republican go back on that and say, okay, I'm going to try to appoint people who at least have the appearance of being non-partial? Maybe Democrats do. Democrats, they kind of polarized in the other direction. So like in the 2024 election, they accepted it and they wouldn't tolerate any ideas of kind of stolen election. And Biden got pushed back when he pardoned Hunter and he pardoned the members of his family. But I don't know if that's sustainable. If Republicans are just openly not caring about the rule of law or caring about even like creating the appearance of something untoward's going on or the appearance of corruption. I think every Republican is going to be like Trump because there's never going to be an acknowledgement that Trump was wrong, even if something bad happens. And so like, do Democrats like just themselves like maintain these norms? It's hard to imagine. I think the only hope, the best hope here is that like after Trump, like Republicans are just in the wilderness for a while and Democrats can kind of act as like a responsible ruling party. Because if we stay like this, where every 4 years you're going to have somebody who's basically like Trump, assuming Trump himself doesn't try to run a third term, but you have like basically somebody who sees Trump as a model and keeps acting like this, and we go back and forth between Republicans and Democrats, that's a potentially terrible state of affairs. So yeah, I mean, I think that like a couple election cycles and 10 years of Democrats winning, which is possible. I mean, it could be Trump is like kind of, he's got his magic at the ballot box, but like anytime Trump's not been on the ballot since 2016, really, since Trump started dominating our politics, Democrats have done well. So there is a scenario where the Republicans get wiped out in 2026, 2028, the economy's tanked, Trump is not on the ballot, and like they don't adjust and they're just crazy people, but without Trump's appeal. And Democrats, have a decade of maybe not unified control of the government because the Senate is very hard, but at least the presidency and the House. And then, time could potentially heal all wounds. Maybe the Republicans could be something different. But no, I take the idea that, we're kind of, our democracy is in a threatened stage right now.
That's a great segue to my last question that I'd love to leave you with and hear your thoughts on, which is just kind of a state of the left, your assessment of where the Democratic Party is and what the left is doing right and wrong. I mean, again, it occurs to me that a few months ago, you weighed your options and despite everything we're hearing in this interview, chose to punch a ballot for Donald Trump. So talk to me a little bit about, what you're seeing from the left right now, strengths and weaknesses. It sounds like maybe strengths are not as conspiratorial as the right, maybe could come in and be a kind of quote unquote responsible ruling party, but where you think they should move in order to win over some people like you or some of the kind of middle ground voters that they might have to go after in 2026 and 2028.
Yeah, I mean, so I think they're learning on the wokeness issue. I mean, I think they're kind of understanding that, they're tiptoeing away from that. They know that's bad politics and probably not good policy either. I think that, we've seen even with the pushback to many things Trump's doing, the least pushback is to kind of the DEI and affirmative action stuff. That stuff, even Democratic appointed judges have tended to uphold those things, partly because the the law is, I think the Republicans do have the law on their side here in the way that they don't on a lot of these other issues. So that's encouraging. I mean, I'm encouraged by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein's book. I interviewed Derek Thompson recently about abundance. I like the fact that they acknowledge openly that the Democratic states in particular have not governed well. That's a remarkable admission. It kind of goes against the grain of human nature to admit that. And so that's encouraging. I see some politicians kind of citing these kind of arguments. Obama brought it up. Housing at the DNC, Kamala, kind of flirted with these ideas too during her campaign. And so that's encouraging. At the same time, the pushback to the abundance agenda has also been there. I think there is a kind of there's a critique from people on the right that I've seen that like the Democrats are their interest groups. Like it's not just like there's no like intellectual there who just could come and like lay down the law. They are a coalition of like labor unions and these like environmentalist activists and these kind of, woke groups. And like, that's like where the power and kind of the energy is. And you could have these, these New York Times and Atlantic writer could go together and write a book. It's not going to change the facts on the ground. In 5 years, it still may be the case that Republicans are better on the housing, despite the Republican Party kind of going insane and not being introspective and the Democrats kind of liberals having this discussion. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to better policy on the ground. And so like this kind of thing where it's like, there's a lot of good cognitive habits on the left. I think like all the corrupt and conspiratorial, like RFK, like, the corrupt and conspiratorial and really crazy people have got over the right. It's by default made the left like more introspective and more even like ethical and responsible. And that's a good sign. And there's some of the ideas are like headed in the right direction. At the same time, the kind of the flaws that made the Democratic Party what it is and what I think, why I'm not a Democrat in the first place, they're still there. They're still powerful. And so like, that's where like the battle lines are going to be over the next, 5-10 years.
All right, Richard, thanks so much for spending some time with us. If people want to keep up with some of your writing, where's the best place for them to do that?
Mainly the Substack, richardhanania.com. I'm posting there a little bit less often now. I'm working on a book, actually. But yeah, I still post articles somewhat regularly. And then, of course, Twitter is the other place. That's also just my handle is my name.
Richard Hanania, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Appreciate it, Isaac. Thank you.